Okay, welcome. Today's webinar in partnership with the New Zealand Wine Growers. We're very pleased to bring you today a business webinar, all looking at the business for wine for New Zealand 2022 and beyond. The idea today is to, over the next 60 minutes, we're going to kick a lot of tires and put the New Zealand wine sector very much under the microscope and assess where its big opportunities still remain around the world, but also address some of the obstacles and some of the stumbling blocks that might also get in the way. Before we kick off, I think it's fair to say that there's no doubt that New Zealand has been one of the big success stories in the global wine industry over the last 10 to 15 years, particularly so over the last 5 to 8 years, where for a country, it has become arguably the most important for Sauvignon Blanc in the world, and it's created a kind of category all of its own for Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. And wine lists around the world are now crying out and really want a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc for their list. But it's also done so in a way that other countries crave, and that's from a premium price position. So New Zealand's growth and its reputation in the world has always been based on the fact it has a premium price in the industry. But it's also fair to say that over the last couple of years, the world hasn't been too kind to New Zealand in terms of harvests and vintages and pressure on volumes and supply, which has had a knock-on effect in terms of availability of New Zealand wine, just at a time when the world is crying out for Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. There's been a lot less of it. So in a way, we're sort of joining this debate at a critical time in New Zealand's wine history, and a really a good opportunity to reevaluate and reassess where its true potential is. And to help me do so, I'm very happy to be joined by a panel of global as well as New Zealand experts. Must say, actually, with the title of Business of Wine and Beyond, I feel like I ought to be introducing Buzz Lightyear, but as he's not available, I'm very pleased to welcome our panel, which Erica Crawford, who's from Love Block Vintners, who, along with her husband and partner, Kim Crawford, have helped create one of New Zealand's biggest export brands, and they're hoping to do the same now, I think, with Love Block Vintners. So, Erica, nice to have you on board. From the other side of the New Zealand branded wine world, we have Matt Deller, Master of Wine, who's Chief Global Sales Marketing Officer for Villa Maria, one of New Zealand's most famous global wine brands, and I suppose actually for many, their introduction to New Zealand wine. And it's now available, I think, in over 60 countries, is it, Matt, I think?
Great, yeah.
Very good, okay. And prior to Villa Maria, Matt also spent some time working with Constellation and has lots of experience working on other global brands, including Robert Mondavi and their very successful The Prisoner brand. David Downs, welcome to you, David. The Chief Executive of the New Zealand Story Group. Now David sits a little bit outside the wine industry, but he's very much all about brand New Zealand and spends his time literally telling stories about New Zealand and why New Zealand is a country, a market, and has products that the world needs. Prior to working in that particular role, he used to work for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and was also part of Microsoft for a good 13 years. And I see in your CV that you describe yourself as an ex-comedian, which is fascinating. So whether you ever become an ex-comedian, hopefully you haven't.
You stop being funny. That's when you become a comedian, and so clearly you can't expect too much of me. But thank you very much for the welcome.
Okay, great. And coming to us from California, very pleased to have Rob McMillan, who's one of America's most influential wine figures. He's the top wine analyst at the Silicon Valley Bank, and is probably most well known for producing the State of the Wine Industry reports. In fact, Rob, you're about to release your 2022 version, aren't you? I think this week or next week.
Yeah, it'll be the 19th of January.
All right. Well, we can plug that now, and we can plug that later if you want. But thanks a lot for Rob as well for joining us. So as I say, over the next hour, we're going to explore different aspects of New Zealand's story. Perhaps go through each of the panelists in turn, and then we'll come together as we go and look at some of the bigger challenges together. David, can I come to you first? I mean, as you are Mr. Brown New Zealand, and we are joined today by people all over the world. Do you want to perhaps give New Zealand, give your starters for 10 on New Zealand? Can you
the business
explain your role really, and what New Zealand wine stories do, or New Zealand stories do?
Oh, well, kia ora koutou. That means hello to everybody in our native language here. Well, I guess many people know New Zealand through our imagery of our beautiful country, and that's been both a blessing and a curse in some ways for New Zealand. So we, for many years, our great, global proposition has been about the beauty of our land, and people want to come and visit, and we are very blessed with natural beauty. Lord of the Rings is a great advertisement for the country. But we also know that is an incomplete picture of the country. And as you get more knowledgeable and start to really experience the country of New Zealand, you'll realize there is much more to it than just natural beauty. We also have, incredible people. We have, it's the most trustworthy place in the world to do business, in terms of some of the statistics. We are the, we often quote the fact that we are #1 in the world for human rights, for example, ease of doing business, #1 in the world for corruption, transparency. So we've got a whole lot of things that make us not only a great place to visit, but a great place to do business with, a trustworthy country. And then, of course, you've got this incredible what comes from the land. So the landscape is not just the picture behind me of beauty, but also the provenance. And that's really the story of the New Zealand wine, and the industry of wine is really around this provenance and the fact that, as one of the youngest countries in the world. In fact, New Zealand was the last major landmass on the planet to be settled by humans. Only about 800 years ago, the first Polynesian settlers came, and the Europeans about 200 years ago. And very early in their history, they realized that what they could get from the land was incredible quality. And while we are a large, farm, if you like, at the bottom of the planet, we produce much more than we can consume ourselves. And we produce it at a really high quality level. And so that's really a key story for New Zealand as well. It's this idea that we create high quality products. And I'm sure we're going to talk about the volume versus value debate. Do you produce a lot of wine at a very low value, or do you produce high quality wine? And really the default position for a country the size of New Zealand is to be in that quality area. So that's the kind of key story for us.
And is it my perception that the majority of your exports are at that kind of premium level? Be it the dairy, be it the meat, be it the wine. Is that a fair assessment?
It's basically, having spent 10 years at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, so one of the key pieces of advice we give any organization is to think really about where they want to play in that quality curve, because you can't really compete at volume and scale. Even the largest New Zealand wine producer will be, relatively small on a global scale. And so therefore, going out there in any industry, and dairy is the same, and trying to compete at on price is probably not a winning strategy. You've got to think about how you compete on value, how you compete on story, on provenance, on brand, on the attributes that consumers are now really valuing, not just price, because price is really going to be a race to the bottom. And most of the industries and sectors we see coming out of New Zealand are doing exactly that. Over the last couple of years, since COVID, actually, and of course the global supply challenges have been, incredible. And you mentioned that some of the vintage challenges as well. But what we've been doing is really leaning into this idea that New Zealand products and food in particular is, we call it made with care, and we have a whole campaign that we've been running globally around made with care. And this idea that New Zealand is a country that cares about people and cares about the planet, cares about the products and the quality that we create. It really resonates with consumers. We're seeing huge uptake in consumers in the priority markets that we put this into, the UK and Singapore, Australia, etc. Because consumers are much more conscious about what they put in their bodies, and maybe their health, the global pandemic has been a benefit in some ways to food producing countries like New Zealand. People are more aware of going and finding things that have got a human health benefit, or at least a story of the types of people and the types of value and benefit they're going to get from the food that they create. So That Made with Care campaign, which we've been running now for about 18 months, includes the wine industry as well as other food sectors. As mentioned, we're probably seeing something like a 200 to 300% uptake on some of the brands that are in as part of that campaign, based on the idea that we go out there with this idea that New Zealand is a country that cares about people and has a deep connection to the place that we're from, and that underpins all the food products that come from this country, including some of the brands that are represented here.
And I guess that image, the pandemic, is potentially being even more underlined. I mean, sitting here in the UK, I know many of my friends and have commented on the fact that how you've dealt with the pandemic is very different to how other countries have, and I know you've had an incredibly strict lockdown, but it also seems sort of almost this community, the New Zealand people as a community have also bonded as well. That kind of care messaging really seems to have come to the fore during this time.
It does, and it's come for us from our Prime Minister and from the top, from leadership, talks about care, and it's quite an unusual concept to talk about when you're talking about managing a country. Suddenly you talk about being kind to each other and caring, but it actually has resonated relatively well, and it's very much on brand for New Zealand. We have in Māori culture this, which is the local language here, we have this idea of manaakitanga, which is taking care of people, looking after each other. And it's actually something that most New Zealanders do without even thinking about it. It's part of who we are and what we do. We care for each other, and then we care for the land. This is a concept called kaitiaki, and kaitiaki means long-term guardianship of the land. We don't the Māori people don't see themselves as owning anything. They see themselves as being caretakers. When you have that mental shift about caring for the land and caring for people, it sort of dictates the way you behave. So yeah, New Zealand's COVID response, I mean, we've had remarkable, really, on a global scale in terms of all of the metrics that you'd expect. That comes with consequences, because obviously we've had to make sure that our country is protected from most of the variants and the virus. But we're getting to a stage now, I think, where we're starting to see a re-emergence, and New Zealand's vaccine status is pretty high, very high, one of the highest in the world. So, there's light at the end of the tunnel in terms of renormalizing some of our trade relationships with the rest of the world, albeit that it's still early days.
Okay. Just before we go into talk to some of the wine, on the wine side specifically, can I just perhaps finish off this particular part by looking at, for you, that message? I know obviously being in the UK, there's a very strong connection with New Zealand. How is that in other parts of the world? I mean, America, Canada, where perhaps people aren't traveling to New Zealand or don't have family connections as much as parts of the world.
We're very lucky. New Zealand's got a very high desirability with in the research we do, and this isn't just me saying it, we do a lot of international research on perceptions of New Zealand, both from a consumer and a buyer and a business level. And we're almost at an all-time high in terms of New Zealand as a brand, as a country's desirability to visit, to do business with, to educate your kids, those sorts of things. It's variable in different parts of the world. We struggle in some countries because they see us as being too far away, and that's people are more conscious of travel perhaps these days. But in terms of our global brand perceptions, we're doing really well. The thing for us is always, it's sort of looping back to what I first started with, is making sure that people realize that this is more than just a beautiful country to visit. It's also a great developer or producer of amazing products and food and wine, and a trustworthy economy that you can rely on the people that come from New Zealand. So those messages are definitely starting to get out there as well, which is very pleasing.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll come back later on and perhaps take your thoughts on some of the structural issues or structural possibilities for the wine sector.
Sure.
Erica and Matt, perhaps if I come to you next, in terms of, also you're both from a wine producer background or representing. Can you just give us a sense of picking up on what David just said there? I mean, do a lot of those messages, lots of that kind of imagery when you're out, when you could travel, is that the kind of responses that you would also pick up on and get a reaction to? I mean, Erica, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things New Zealand does very well. You mentioned that thing about community, and just taking it to the wine industry, when we've always done it together because we're too small to be significant against any big player. So the way New Zealand wine launched onto the scene in a new phase as an exporter was as one, and the community sense of community is very strong. And I think that whole natural beauty and openness, progressiveness, especially with our new Prime Minister, I think she's done a lot for our country's image, irrespective of one's politics. New Zealand's incredibly favourably viewed in all the markets that I deal in.
Yeah. And Matt, I mean, I mentioned earlier, Villa Maria is what, in 60 countries? I mean, what's your sort of take on how Villa Maria is perceived in different markets around the world, or New Zealand actually in general?
Yeah, I guess the only caveat I'd give to what's been said before is that New Zealand as a country and its natural beauty and its culture and people, these are proof points to the brand. They're not the brand. And when you think, it's important to think of, and I always think of the US consumer because I lived in the US for 7 years, but the US consumer standing there looking at the grocery shelves, they're not thinking about sheep and Lord of the Rings and things. They're thinking, what's this wine going to taste like, and is it going to satisfy my emotional and functional needs? So I think that part is a brilliant part of New Zealand as well, because New Zealand wine has a distinctive flavor, it has a distinctive taste profile, and it's a taste profile that people want. And we're seeing an even greater consumer trend towards refreshment and vitality from wine. And then things like the beauty of the land and our sustainability are really powerful proof points that support that.
Yeah, okay. So perhaps if we look at the kind of the situation you've had over the last couple of years in terms of dealing with the pandemic and not being able to travel, and I suppose having to rely on, has that really helped in terms of having an image that's allowed New Zealand to keep on growing in your international markets at a time when you literally have not been able to go out there and market yourselves face to face? Matt, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge how devastating this pandemic's been, and the number one priority for us is keeping our people safe, and when with the 2020 vintage, COVID came to New Zealand timed with the 2020 vintage, so we had to figure out how to manage a socially isolated vintage, and we hired a whole lot of camper vans and had everyone living on site, and it was I guess a fun camping situation for the first week, and then by week 8 everyone was happy, keen to go home and have a hot shower. But so I think that's that's first and foremost. But from a demand perspective, demand for New Zealand wine and Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc in particular has never been stronger. And I think one of the things, if I think of Australia specifically, Australia was a very mature market for New Zealand wine and for Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc particularly. And Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc was suffering from a little bit of familiarity breeds contempt in Australia in 2019. And COVID actually encouraged people to go back to what was familiar and go back to what they knew was going to deliver. In such uncertainty, people were looking for, something that was reassuring, and Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc delivered that to them. And what we've seen is a lot of people hadn't realised how far Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc's come in quality and style, even in the last 5, but certainly 10 years. And Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc now it's better and more interesting than it's ever been. It's not it's not as overt as it used to be. It's not as pungent, aggressive, etc. as it used to be. It's still vibrant. It's still juicy. It's still pure, but in a far more interesting and compelling way than ever before. And so that's brought people back into Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc category, even in markets where it's quite a mature category.
Erica, do you want to pick up what Matt said there in terms of how you've seen the category develop over the last couple of years?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think particularly in this time, we know that channels have shifted and people have largely gone to grocery to pick up their wine as a one-stop shop in the pandemic. And then through that, and it's been quite interesting for smaller brands like mine, obviously through that, more familiar, bigger brands are on shelf, and they're the ones who've really benefited from this pandemic. So it's been quite interesting for smaller, specialized, I guess, brands like a lot of smaller New Zealand brands are. How did we manage this whole thing? And it has been hard, because we're largely on-trade based for the most part. And so the relationship that we had to maintain over the distance through all these pandemic times has been quite important. So how did we keep our relationship with the importer, with the importer's representatives, with the wholesaler, with the account? And I think that was probably the biggest lesson learned. We all did a lot of Zoom tastings, but we evolved from Zoom tastings into doing smaller vignettes onto specialized platforms for people. So that was really big learning, because relationships are so utterly important in the wine industry, because we're not selling toilet paper, we're selling a discretionary item that you don't need in life. So yeah, definitely seen that. And whether people are looking for new iterations and developed iterations of Sauvignon Blanc, I definitely seen an interest and a surge towards that as well. Yeah, for sure. Although, of course, it's a standard bell curve, isn't it? Most people are still looking for the classic Marlborough Sauvignon profile, and then there are those who are looking for more, because we have been around for some 30 years now on the international stage. So it is quite interesting working in that little front end of the developed and evolving brand or flavor exploration range of Sauvignon particularly.
Yeah, I mean, building on that, I mean, do you think is it a level of frustration, I suppose, that you've obviously had this bad harvest that's kind of sent ripples around the world, really, in terms of, like, if I talk to buyers, people, one of the first things people mention is New Zealand, the shortage of New Zealand wine equals, and then people are having to, like, scrabble around the world trying to find alternatives. Is there a kind of a level of frustration that this shortage is, I mean, a bad harvest is bad at any time, but having built up this momentum and got this renewed interest, then suddenly, you weren't able to actually keep up with that demand? I mean, Matt?
Yeah, I think when I talked about familiarity before, I think, there's been a perception up until this harvest that Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, there was a spigot, right? And you could have as much as you want. I think, grasping the reality that Marlborough is perhaps 95% fully planted, that we are a marginal cool climate, and so we are prone to vintage variation. And I will accentuate that it was a challenging harvest in terms of quantity. It was a phenomenal harvest in terms of quality. And in fact, we've had 3 phenomenal harvests in a row, which means that almost all of the wine all of the New Zealand wine on the global market now is from a brilliant harvest, and that's probably helping to fuel the demand. So yeah, absolutely, it's frustrating that we've seen this dramatic surge in demand and interest in New Zealand wine, and being delivered a harvest that means that we can't supply to that demand. But at the same time, it was always going to happen, right? It was a matter of when, and this harvest just brought it forward a little bit. And what it's done is it's allowed us to really reposition New Zealand wine and Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc in particular as a classic wine of the world, not a commercial beverage. And you know, it's astonished me how quickly the mindset has changed, both trade and consumer, in a really positive way. What I would say is that New Zealand's other varieties, because of the global closures of on-premise, where a lot of those other varieties have been sold, you know, the big supermarkets, as Erica was talking about, tend to favour, you know, big brands, classic, you know, the main varieties, et cetera, but we're starting to see, and we're seeing more consumer interest in other varieties, particularly, you know, in the last 3 months, we've shipped 50% more Pinot Gris than we budgeted for, and it makes sense. If there's a shortage of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and someone's in a grocery store and there's a, you know, New Zealand Pinot Gris with the Villa Maria brand on it, why wouldn't you try that? So we've seen the trade try to substitute with Sauvignon Blanc from other countries, but I would argue that other varieties from New Zealand probably share more in common with what consumers are actually looking for: that purity, that freshness, that juiciness, that vibrancy, that fruitiness. You get that from New Zealand wine. You don't get that necessarily from Sauvignon Blanc from other countries.
Excellent, thank you. Erica, what's your thoughts in terms of like dealing with this Sauvignon Blanc issue at the moment, in terms of the shortage and where that puts New Zealand?
I think it's been a double banger, and you know, I know we're going to cover this because not only have we got a short vintage, it's also the supply chain issues that we have. So the little bit of wine that we have, we're having great difficulty getting to market, especially in North America. We find it a little bit easier getting to the UK, but Canada and the US pose particular problems. So I think New Zealand's facing a double whammy with that, and I think that there's a bit of a sympathy vote for us in that respect, but people still have a business to run and they still got to have wine on shelf for people. So we have found it quite difficult, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm keen to get Rob and David's views on the Sauvignon Blanc issue in the main, which perhaps we'll come to later on. I'm keen, Rob, you've been sitting waiting patiently there. Just actually, you mentioned America there, and clearly America and North America is one of New Zealand's key export markets that it's keen to grow. I thought it would be interesting for Rob if you could give perspective on how the American wine market, which is now so kind of influential for the whole world to understand. If you perhaps sort of kick off with your assessment of how the last year, 18 months have gone in America, and then perhaps we can look at New Zealand in particular.
Yeah, so I think I'd start with saying there is probably if you're in a parlor game at some point and somebody asks you, what do toilet paper and wine have in common? And the answer is they were both hoarded in the beginning of the pandemic here. Hard for me to believe, but that's what happened. And the channel shifting was a big deal out here. On the whole West Coast, we had all of the wineries close their tasting rooms. We had all the restaurants closed. Obviously we're not alone in that, but that's a big deal. That's a large percent of the premium wine producers, get through that. But yeah, I think it was Erica's point. The larger producers did quite well with the on-premise back there. The off-premise, but the American consumer is going through quite a change. We have gone through about 25 years now where my generation, the boomer generation, has kind of led everybody into this wine category. It's just the way it took off, starting in 1994. And now we're at this point where the median boomer in the United States is 66. So it's normal retirement age. And, you know, when that consumer hits 66 on average, you know, some of the group sunsets. I got to say that in a nice way. I'm never going to sunset, but some of the group might. And so that group that we've depended on is sunsetting out, and we have to do a better job of attracting that young consumer. So I'm going to go to a couple of slides just to show you what's happening here. And the first one's combined on and off premise depletions. As we all know, there's a large amount of channel shifting that's gone on. Online has just exploded in the United States, up 100, 200%. Depends how you want to count it. But that's sustained. It happened during 2020, and it's still sustaining through 2021. I thought it might drop a little bit as things kind of came back to the mean, but that didn't happen. So this chart that you're looking at, what it is a chart of both on and off premise wholesale depletions. And the top line, the blue line, is spirits, and the bottom line is wine. And I like this chart a lot. It's probably the most important chart you're going to find, because it's the only place that you can take out that noise, if you will, from all the channel shifting. And what you can see here is the wine and spirits trended together through a period of time until we got to our reopening in the U.S. It's kind of started in, let's call it February of 2021, after we started getting vaccines out a little bit. And I thought, and I predicted in the State of the Industry report, that we would have a party. And that party would be, there'd be a tailwind. And we've seen it before at the end of World War II. Some people said it was going to be like the Roaring '20s. But I liked it after World War II because we actually have data that was past our era of prohibition. And so it turns out we did have a party as everything was reopening up. All the on-premise was reopening up, and you can see that the growth in spirits took off. And I would have never seen this, but the growth in the volume of wine went down. It went down substantially, and it's still trending down. We're down in volume right now about 6.1% and 9% on a trailing 3-month basis. So that's a big surprise to me. Let me go to the next slide. Looking at varietal growth. So here we have a slide that is, you can see the varietals in the bottom, and market share is the blue column, and then the dots are the growth rate. And you can see a lot of red in this. As a matter of fact, the only positive moving varietals, are Prosecco, specialty wines, and sparkling other. But Cabernet, Cab Sauv, red blends, Pinot Grigio, things that have traditionally been moving pretty well here aren't. And that's another big surprise. So let's move to the next slide. This is something that I came up with 2 months ago. And Harris Poll was a polling organization in the United States. I contacted them and I said, I need to understand what Mindshare wine has, just as a consumer product in the United States. And so I came up with this idea. The question is, what would you bring to a party if you were asked to share something? And I thought that would be a pretty good way to get at it. And so the slide you're looking at now is breaking all of the age bands into 24 to 35, 35 to 45, 45, 54, et cetera. And what you see in this blue column here is that the 65 plus crowd, they're at 50%. Half of them would say that they would bring wine, and the rest of them split up against the other categories. That's where most of the wealth is in the United States right now. And as I said, that's the group that's retiring. But if you move down to the next category, the 55 to 65 group, they're at 30%. They're 20% lower. If that's in Mindshare, they're more ambivalent whether they're going to bring wine or beer. And that speaks a lot to the issue that we have, because we have a generation that I call it the lifestyles of the rich and famous. It was my generation. That's the way we did things. We wore labels outward. You know, it's not the same for the new generation. They see displays of wealth as, you know, being kind of an anathema to their values. You know, sustainability, things that are from our generation to this generation, very different. And in our country, I've been talking about it for years, that we're not doing a good enough job in talking about sustainability and for instance, health aspects. So in the United States, you can't talk about health if you're a licensed producer of alcohol. But what you can do is talk about how much alcohol is in it, because calories are part of health, and people, you know, are health conscious, but they don't know how much is in a bottle of wine, how many calories in a bottle of wine. So that's a big deal. We have to move away from, you know, talking about gracious dining and, you know, showing, you know, mansions and, you know, to having fun, really. I mean, we have to kind of change the vision, and we have to attract this consumer with values that matter to them. This is this chart here, this wine consumption by cohort. This is a chart that I run every year, and you can see that right now, so I actually predicted this 10 years ago, that this year we would see both Gen X and boomers. This would be the crossover year where we would see the Gen X finally take over as the dominant cohort for wine consumption. And I turned out to be right. Now, I like those predictions that are 10 years old, or say it the other way. I like to make a prediction 10 years out, because by the time anybody sees it, nobody remembers it. So I have to remind everybody I said this, but it says the same thing, is that you know, boomers are a big part of this. Gen X is coming up, and the young consumers, which are up into their 40s now, their low 40s, aren't engaging. Last one I'm gonna run through, this is about prices. So what's happening with prices? You guys have mentioned supply chain difficulties. Boy, in the United States, it's been terrible in a lot of ways. You know, I started my kitchen remodel March of 2020, and it's done, but I still don't have my stove. It's sitting in a port somewhere on a boat, I don't know where. And that, you know, that extends across a lot of things. If you talk to producers, bottles, capsules, corks, boxes, and then transportation. You know, it's a heavy thing. How do you get it from place to place? And the distributors here now are charging fuel surcharges because of the rising costs of fuel. So, you know, when we survey, and this survey has got about 800 wineries in it, respondent wineries. And what they come up with is, yeah, we're taking price increases this year. And last year, for what it's worth, there were only 36% that said they were going to take an increase. And the 2021, it's 72% that said they're going to take an increase. But, you know, how much they can get out of it is a little bit of a question mark to me. Now, I'm going to leave these slides now with, but with one statement: is what you have in the United States effectively is two different wine industries. You know, the premium wine industry, let's call that 20 and above. Maybe it goes down to 15. And then you have the high production industry. It's where, you know, all the volume. That's what goes through the railroads. That's what goes into the groceries, et cetera. To the extent we saw good movement out of grocery last year, and the large producers benefited from that, see the exact same opposite. Remember that first chart I showed you, how how wine was coming down when we reopened for business. You know, that's as we shift out of channels. Grocery went down for those producers. When you add them together, what we find is there's a significant problem below $11. We're losing, you know, 10% in volume. It's a substantial amount. That side of the market isn't doing good. Premiumization is part of it. I think there's a lot more to it than that, but the consumer is looking for better wines, higher prices, New Zealand has always just been right in the sweet spot of premiumizing the consumer. The question you have to ask yourself is this consumer in 10 years, the one that I showed you had 65 and up, that had that affinity to wine that you've been depending on, and now they're going to be 75, and you're replacing them with another consumer that is at this point, it's not top of their mind. Wine is not part of their mind share. It's beer, spirits, just drinking across categories. So in America, we're losing that wine consumer.
So Rob,
Go ahead, Richard.
No. So just in terms of like bringing this back, the context for New Zealand, then I mean, there are clearly some potential benefits there for New Zealand because of its premium positioning and its quality positioning, and its all the conversation we had earlier about its authenticity and its provenance. I mean, from where you're sitting, where do you see New Zealand over the next sort of 4 or 5 years in America?
Well, I happened to be speaking at I think it was the Romeo Brigado, I think that's how you say it, convention maybe 5 years ago. One of the things I said when I was there was in Blenheim was that the brand New Zealand is, it's very well thought of in the United States. New consumers are not wanting to be what their parents were. You don't want to drive your dad's car to school, right? You don't want to be seen in your parents' car. You want your own identity. You want to discover your own things. And New Zealand is coming along right at a time where those consumers are looking for those. And you can still find in America, reasonably priced Sauvignon Blanc. So you're square in the middle of that sweet spot. My encouragement when I was in Blenheim was that you expand into. I mean, I had never had a Syrah. Well, only once that was like Hawke's Bay Syrah when I was there. The Central Otago, the Pinots that were made out of there are incredible. And my comment was, you guys need to do a better job of expressing more than just Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, because you guys are more than that. You make a lot of really good wine, and there's going to be a lot of demand for it. When you have small production of those varietals, you're going to be able to hold price.
Great, thank you. That's really thanks, Rob. That's really fantastic insight into what's going on in America. We really appreciate that those comments. Erica, I know you've also, without going into great detail, but I mean, in terms of your perception, I know you've done some work looking at New Zealand in America. Does some of what Rob there tally to what you've also been seeing or experiencing?
Yes, I think that the whole perception of New Zealand is of great sustainability. It still has a clean green image. It has a relatively youthful and young image. So I think it plays very well into those lower demographics. But moreover, with something that's the envy of a lot of other wine producers, and that's New Zealand's very strong sustainability program. And we're not particularly good at articulating how amazing this system is. And, there's a very strong move towards organic amongst a lot of growers as well. So there's great room for us to move into that whole conscious consumer also, where with New Zealand's values, a lot of the younger consumers have overlaying the purchase decision, they impose their values of ethical farming, for instance, of charity, of diversity, etc. So I think there's a whole new consumer opening up for us that is going to be incredibly valuable, and where New Zealand already has a very strong foothold. So I'm quite excited about this. But in America, for instance, we're very reliant, as you said, on Sauvignon Blanc. We're very reliant on Marlborough. And in terms of price point, of course, New Zealand is higher than the average bottle of wine. I think most of our Sauvignon Blanc sells between 9 and 11, and then that's about 50% and about 32% between 12 and 15. So that's higher than the average bottle of wine. And people do think twice when they go and they buy a bottle of wine. So we want them to go for the quality, but also go for the values that sit behind a New Zealand wine. So I think that's some great encouragement there. in the US particularly, we're not doing very well with other varietals. It really has been quite hard. Pinot Noir is making a foothold, but I have to tell you, it has been hard work to get those listings in restaurants. And of course, Chardonnay, I think we've got an opportunity with Chardonnay, because Chardonnay's got with the lovely cool climate Chardonnay. If we don't kill it with wood, we will be very well positioned to sit in behind Sauvignon Blanc with a crispy white.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Matt, you mentioned earlier about how the current situation with Marlborough Blanc and the sort of shortages is actually, in a way, an opportunity for New Zealand to sort of realign itself and to look at its premium position, and not the danger of, well, for example, in America, falling below $10. Do you want to pick up on what Rob was saying there, just in terms of like where perhaps build a little bit more on that, on how New Zealand does do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've observed all the same trends and probably a lot of it's come from Rob's research around, I guess, a truncating of the overall wine category. But I look at, but there are several heartening things for me. One is the premiumization trend. So there's a less but better trend in wine, and that ties into, and it's not surprising that when the question was asked, what would you bring to a party, wine didn't feature and as much as you'd expect, and that gels with research that we've done. But by the same token, wine does own the dining table occasion, and wine plays really strongly in relax and unwind and reward. And again, unsurprising that the growth is coming from Prosecco and sparkling and things, because that is that's the ultimate party wine, right? So yeah, in a sense, from a Villa Maria perspective, because we are a premium wine producer and we believe in the culture of wine, and we believe in sustainability, we believe in terroir and craft and those sorts of things. You can't experience those things at a party to the same extent.
Can I just push you a little bit on? I mean, obviously Villa Maria is, it's a very big brand, and there are also other big brands from New Zealand, and I suppose, particularly in the UK, there's definitely been a kind of a pressure amongst the big supermarkets to get that Sauvignon Blanc price down, and with all due respect, you see Villa Maria on promotion quite a lot. I mean, so from a point of view of New Zealand, the industry looking at itself and saying, okay, a lot of buyers over the last 6 months and over the next 6 months to a year are going to be looking at other countries for Sauvignon Blanc. Is this the time now to push back and say, no, we need to get New Zealand back to 9, 10 average price points, 11 point,
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's happening. So, the average price of New Zealand wine in the last 52 weeks is £7.85, up from £7.29 2 years ago. Villa Maria is the average is up around £8.60 now. And our shelf price is £10. So and that's where it should be as a wine. It is a premium wine, and then on top of that, there is premiumization above that, and we've touched on it. But there are different areas of premiumization with even with Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc around sub-regionality. So we have a reserve range of Villa Maria where we have an Awatiri Valley Sauvignon Blanc. We have a Wairau Valley Sauvignon Blanc. We're about to add a Southern Valley Sauvignon Blanc. So we represent the three major sub-regions at the reserve level, and then at single vineyard level, we'll continue to expand our single vineyard range. And and every one of those wines is dramatically different from each other, and the whole concept of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is a wine of place, with a sense of place and an identity, and a wine that can express very distinct terroirs. I think that's a really exciting opportunity for Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, and it really plays into again the trends that Rob was talking about. I think wine's just going to play to its strengths, and it's going to be a beverage of culture. It's going to be a beverage of it's not going to be the party drink, and kind of that's okay, I think.
Yeah. Yes, but if I could just add something here, I think also, we've been around for some 30 years now with Sauvignon Blanc, and we're really starting to explore the boundaries of flavors, in the use of concrete eggs and the use of amphora and the use of, we use tannin extracted from green tea, and the flavors from that it extracts out of Sauvignon Blanc is quite different. So we have to continue. Innovation for me is really quite important to stay alive in this category too. And the beautiful thing about New Zealand is, and coming from a country where there are expectations of what we should and shouldn't do, the beautiful thing about New Zealand is there is no expectation of tradition, and that's why we were so successful with, for instance, screw caps. So we've got freedom to innovate and explore that people give us, and I think this is another opportunity, and people are moving more into that position. Apart from looking, of course, terroir and sub-regionality is super important, and we're seeing some fantastic wines like that Summer Villas, range and Astrolabe, etc. But for me, it's also how we manage it in the vineyard and in the winery that we can push the boundaries of flavors even further and further and further. And we see great consumer interest in that.
Yeah, I mentioned in the introduction that New Zealand has created this new category in wine of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, which I suppose nobody else in the world can have that. So the opportunity is there for you to reimagine and to stretch that category as much as you can. David, I know you've been sitting patiently from the beginning. Can I just come back to you just in terms of we Rob touched on it there. We have mentioned this before that there's 80, 90, possibly even higher exports from New Zealand in wine is from one particular variety, Sauvignon Blanc. As a trade kind of expert and somebody who looks at other sectors, what's your take on that in terms of is that a good thing? Is that a powerful thing in terms of put all your resources behind it, or does it also put red lights?
You're right, by the way. I've been sitting here actually, my mouth watering, hearing people, Matt and Erica, talk about the vintages and the delicious and the vibrant flavors and the sumptuousness of the wine. And I guess the challenge for us as a country is to translate those attributes of our incredible wine production from one varietal to others, and make sure people realize that quality. And Rob mentioned our Pinot Noir from Central Otago, outstanding, global quality. The Chardonnay is my personal favorite out of New Zealand, is our Chardonnay, as Erica said, cooler weather Chardonnay. So the question there is, how do you translate, how do you make sure that the consumer and the buyers understand that those same sort of attributes that make up this incredible Sauvignon Blanc also exist in other wines, that the flavor profile, etc. Because ultimately it's not healthy to be overly reliant on any single market or product. If you considered New Zealand as a brand or as a marketing agency, then we've got a kind of a family of brands. Yes, one's always going to be a hero, and that's fine. We're probably a little bit over-indexed on it. But that doesn't mean there isn't the quality coming through in the other varietals, and the story from other parts of the country. Than Marlborough, for example, was very strong. So our challenge as an industry is to be able to transfer and translate some of that consumer preference into some of these other varietals, getting them first of all to try and trial these wines, and then to grow reliance or preference for them. So yeah, definitely from my point of view, that's the way to do it. The good news is, as I say, and Erica and others have mentioned this, is that they're all bounded on the same kind of core value set of high quality, care for land, innovative new techniques and ideas, great story behind it. So really, we've got all the attributes, we've got all the kind of levers organizations like Villa Maria or Lovelock are the ones that can help translate that out to consumers.
Yeah, and also picking up on what Matt was saying here about this being a potential realignment with the sort of the shorter vintages and perhaps buyers who would normally go to Marlborough, perhaps go to Chile or South Africa or wherever else. What's your assessment of that in terms of how the industry should view that or to address that?
I think for me, one of the hallmarks, and I'm not an absolute expert here, but one of the things I've witnessed is that the New Zealand wine industry is a very good collaborative organisation, and New Zealand Wine Growers as a kind of an agency across the top has done over the years a remarkable job of aligning together multiple brands and having a kind of a go-to-market approach that's been very successful. Beachheading into new markets with the New Zealand brand to start with, and then a varietal, and then a house, if you like. That same sort of approach is going to be necessary again, I suppose, for us to continue, to regain some of our market positions if we have lost any, and to kind of diversify into new markets. An individual wine brand from New Zealand, unless they're one of the very big ones, is going to struggle. But doing it collaboratively and talking about provenance at a country level, seems to have been something that's worked in our favour in the past, and I think we need to keep that going.
Brilliant. Okay. And Rob, coming back to you, just in terms of, I know you mentioned it a little bit earlier there, but this idea of New Zealand having an over-reliance on Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, what would you like to see from New Zealand? What would be your kind of calling card to them about how they should address that or maximise it?
Well, I think any brander, anybody that does brands, you're going to want to look at where you put all your eggs, and I don't care if it's channel or country. I don't care where it is. And so I think David said it, to the extent you're so focused on Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, it's great, but at some point there's going to be a change, and it may not be the change you want. So a branding agent is going to look at trying to bring other brands along, because things have a tendency to peak and fall, and so you kind of spread out your risk in that. And so it takes a little bit of money to start these things, but then they get up and they start to get on the flywheel, create their own strength. So my argument has been, well, A, it's great wine. B, you can price it at a value point in the U.S. Those other wines, and you possibly can take Pinot Noir as an example, higher in price, because American consumers are used to paying more for red wines.
That's right. That's a great final takeaway from you. I mean, can I just in the time we've got left, perhaps come to the rest of the panel just for your sort of final observations, really, and what you think addressing the subject matter, New Zealand and beyond. Where do you see New Zealand's biggest opportunities and potential? Erica, can I ask you?
Again, I want to go back to the consumer and look at the conscious consumer, because all of us are more conscious about what we do, whether it's what we buy. Do we really need to buy something, or do we want to buy something? So people are definitely reconsidering their purchases more. So I think New Zealand's offering in that regard gives a good value for that purchasing decision. So it's looking at what consumers really want, and we really need to be better at telling the world who we are and what we are, in terms of our sustainability, in terms of our nation's togetherness, etc. So New Zealand's got a great story,
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And Matt, can I ask you?
Yeah, it's the continued positioning of New Zealand wine as premium, I think we've been doing a lot of blind tastings lately just to reassure ourselves that Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc does deliver something distinctively different and superior. And it does, and from all of our blind tastings. So we believe in it, and we believe in its premium positioning, and we're vacating the sort of sub, say, £8 price point and leaving that for other countries, then so be it, right? We'll be an over £8 Sauvignon Blanc producer. I agree with expanding varieties. I actually see a really exciting opportunity for New Zealand sparkling wine, and it's kind of been it's been taunting us for decades, the New Zealand sparkling wine opportunity. You know, it makes so much sense on so many levels, being a cool climate producer of really high quality wine. But you know, this might be, given the positive demand trends for sparkling wine globally and supply challenges from other sparkling wine producing countries, this might be our opportunity to put New Zealand sparkling wine into the consideration set of consumers. And I agree with you know, continuing to present our other varieties. It does tend to be a very it tends to be the more engaged consumers that explore those other varieties from New Zealand, but they really like them. They see the quality. They see that, you know, New Zealand Chardonnay and New Zealand Pinot Noir are just really good Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, irrespective of where they're from. So we need to continue with that, because I think that's really important. It might not be important volumetrically, but it's really important for brand New Zealand and our perception as a quality producer of wine and a premium producer of fine wine.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And David, the final word to you, sir. The punchline can be yours.
Golly, I'm very privileged. I mean, this conversation has been great. I think we've talked about all the right things. If you think about the components of a success, you know, go to market, and others on the call are more expert than me, but you need a consumer demand, you need a high quality product, you need a brand that tells the story of the product, and you need a channel to market. All of these things are coming into alignment for New Zealand. We've always had fantastic product. The consumer demand is only growing. Our brand reputation is growing. Our channels has been a challenge, as we've talked about. That will come back into alignment. I mean, the next couple of years is going to be huge for the wine sector, and it gives us this opportunity to really, you know, build on the value that's been created in the past, diversify and grow. So I'm only hugely positive for the future.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's a really, really nice summary. And from my point of view, I think sort of from a consumer's point of view, it's almost like, you know, the wine consumer is a bit like Oliver Twist. Looking at New Zealand, you know, we want some more. We want more from New Zealand. So there's a great opportunity to, as everyone has said, to pick up on those potential trends. So thanks a lot. I think that's around about an hour. Might be a little bit over, but we think we've done pretty well. Pity there's not a little red button we could press and go into extra time. But thanks a lot for everyone being for our panel, and thanks for you all for watching. And hopefully we've helped address New Zealand business 22 and beyond. Thank you.